Hopefully, Amphibia will soon start getting back into episodes that directly relate to the central conflicts faced by our main trio of Anne, Marcy, and Sasha. Nonetheless, a few charming episodes like this, like Toad's Redemption and Maddie and Marcy, are not going to do anyone any harm. Maddie and Marcy was sweet, but it was Toad's Redemption that really caught my attention. Now, arguably this episode had the deck stacked against it before it even aired, at least in terms of the hardcore fandom. When the episode titles were released, everyone was convinced that this was going to be an episode focusing on Sasha and Grime, and then when it was revealed it was just about Mayor Toadstool, everyone was really disappointed. But when you set all those expectations aside and just consider the episode in its own right, it's actually quite good and quite affecting. It depicts our favorite corrupt Toad politician having to make some difficult choices that go against the image he's had of himself for a while. All he has wanted is to advance politically. All his conniving and manipulation has been to that end. But when he's offered the chance to do so, and to take Grime's position as the head of Toad Tower, he hesitates. He doesn't want to leave Wartwood. Initially, he was not fond at all of this podunk little farming town, but as he's spent a lot of years here, he's come to view it a lot more fondly. Admittedly, it's not the deepest or most complex redemption story in the world, but it is nice to see the show afford the same dignity to its minor characters that it gives to the major players like Anne, Sasha, and Marcy. And it is true that you can come to a stage in your life when you realize that you are no longer the person that you thought you were. That while chasing certain goals and ambitions, you start to not want them anymore. You start to want other things. I've had that happen to me since I've been in college. Of course, there are different layers to that. And it is quite funny to see Anne try and relate to Toadstool about this, because he's coming from a place where the entire perception of himself that he's had for decades is being shattered. And Anne is just this 13-year-old girl who has to try and relate, even though she doesn't quite get where he's coming from. Now, this is not to say that Anne hasn't changed. She has, of course. Your teenage years are a time of change, and that is especially true for Anne, who has become a much different and much stronger person since she landed in Amphibia. That said, she's not changed to the same degree. But despite this, she still tries to help Toadstool. She still tries to do her best to help him fail the examination that the capital, Newtopia, is giving him to see if he's really ready to lead Toad Tower. Toadstool wants to reject this job outright and stay in this small town where he's built a life for himself, but if he just rejects, the capital is going to do terrible things to him. So he has to convince them that he's just not the right person for the job. He has to deliberately sabotage himself, and Anne helps with this. There's certain scenarios in this episode in which Toadstool is trying to prove that he's a coward, or that he's an incompetent mayor who doesn't know how to handle his duties, and Anne is trying to create all these artificial challenges to make him look like a fool. But circumstances don't exactly go their way. Instead, Toadstool ends up looking very brave and very competent, which further impresses the capital. Thankfully for him, the capital turns against him anyway. At the end of the episode, Wartwood is confronted by a mob of unruly toads that want to burn the city to the ground. And Toadstool is very forthright in defending this little town against the toad invasion. He sides with the frogs against the outlaw toads. Now, this should, of course, win him even more praise and acclaim, as he's proved himself willing to defend the town. But Newtopia is not impressed. They turn against him because they think he's too soft-hearted to rule Toad Tower, and instead, Newtopia gives the position of ruling Toad Tower to one of the toads that tried to burn Wardwood to the ground, which says a lot about the Newts. Now, in a way, it is kind of a cop-out that Toadstool gets this burden taken off his shoulders and he doesn't have to make a difficult decision, but honestly, I wouldn't expect more from an 11-minute episode. And it is nice to see him fight for the town that he once so thoroughly despised. Wardwood itself is quite an interesting town. It is in many respects the traditional nice TV town, in which once enough time passes, the grievances between the different citizens of the town get resolved, peace and prosperity result. It's a very idyllic and peaceful little farming community. In a lot of ways, Amphibia valorizes the town and its close-knit community when juxtaposed against the enigmatic, energetic mystery of the city. Now, as someone who much prefers big cities to small towns, I can't quite say I agree with this perspective. Nonetheless, I do find it interesting how the show does not have this rose-tinged, idealistic view of the town. It likes the town a lot, but it accepts that the town takes a lot of time to accept people. Relationships do tend toward peace and amity and prosperity, but they take time to get there, as we saw last week in the case of Marcy. So, what is the future for Toadstool? How is the show's perception of him going to keep changing? Now, it is possible that we might not see him in a big role again. We might not see him except for bit parts here and there. As the show is tending toward the more dramatic, it's possible that it might not have as much time as it once did for these ordinary citizens of Wardwood. Still, if we do see Toadstool again in a significant role, I wonder what the show is going to end up doing with him. A lot of the conflicts that took place early in the show were about the juxtaposition between the earnest, salt-of-the-earth rural townsfolk and this out-of-touch, greedy, money-grubbing mayor. And now that that conflict has been resolved somewhat, with the mayor being firmly on the side of the townsfolk and the townsfolk growing to accept the mayor, I wonder what they are going to do with Toadstool going forward. He's gotten to the point where he would rather use the town's money to actually fix its small problems like potholes instead of building himself fancy jacuzzis, so there is much less space for the straightforward us versus them conflict, as opposed to how it was in the first season of the show. Now, if King Andrias is engaging in dark practices, as appears to be the case, it is unlikely that we are going to be spending as much time in Wardwood going forward, as most of the action is going to move to the mystery and strangeness of Newtopia. Still, I hope that this doesn't mean we have to say goodbye to all our Wardwood residents, whom we've gotten to know quite a bit throughout all these episodes. Possibly they could join Anne and Marcy and probably Sasha as they battle the grand force of evil that Andrea serves. Now, I hope that's not as simple as that. I hope it's not just our three girls team up and battle the forces of evil. I hope they find a way to sprinkle in more personal conflicts, but whatever happens, I do hope we get to see a little more of the Wardwoodians. But even if this is the last time that the mayor receives a significant amount of screen time, it is a fitting conclusion. Toadstool is initially introduced as this money-grubbing mayor who only cares about himself and only cares about material gains and does not actually care about the citizens of the town he rules. Anne describes him as the Monopoly man crossed with fried chicken, and That is a harsh burn, but it's also pretty fair. However, over time he grows to love his position, unglamorous as it may be, and he grows to love the citizens of this town. The allure and peace and calmness and serenity of this small town life proves too much for him to resist. He finds himself drawn into it. And the townspeople start to accept him too, even though they still think of him as a crook. What lies beneath Toadstool's ambition and political drive is a desire to be loved and accepted, and he ends up being loved and accepted by the citizens of Wartwood. He has what he really wanted deep down. The bucolic community he once hated has welcomed him in. Now, this might not be as satisfying as the Anne, Sasha, and Marcy storylines, but it's nonetheless quite charming. So thank you all for watching. If you liked what you saw today, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Donate to my Patreon if you can and you want to see more videos like this. Keep watching Amphibia. It's a clever show, and I'm really interested to see where they go from here. I want to know. I want to know how these mystery elements and these more dramatic elements are going to affect the show as it progresses. What is going to happen to the Anne, Sasha, and Marcy relationships? I really do hope it's not quite as simple as the three of them just immediately becoming friends again and going off and fighting the forces of evil. There's going to be some conflict between them, and I want to see how that plays out. So anyway, tune in soon for my next analysis. It will be coming soon. That I can promise you. Thank y'all again. Adios, comrades.